Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiant, watching the last Zephyrian evacuation ship disappear into hyperspace. The elegant vessel's crystalline hull caught the light of distant stars one final time before vanishing, leaving behind only empty space and the bitter taste of abandonment. "That's the last of them," reported Commander Zhang from the bridge comm. "The Corvani sealed their tunnel networks 3 hours ago. We're getting reports from across the sector. Every non-human settlement is going dark." Elena pressed her palm against the reinforced viewport, feeling the subtle vibration of the ship's engines through the metal. 27 years of service, and she'd never seen anything like this. The Great Evacuation, they were calling it. The most coordinated retreat in galactic history. "And us?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Admiral Chen's orders remain unchanged. All human vessels are to maintain defensive positions. We hold the line. She closed her eyes, remembering the emergency council session 3 days ago. The holographic representatives of a dozen species had spoken with the same voice. Retreat was the only logical option. The Devourers had awakened from their million-year slumber, and no force in the galaxy could stand against them. Better to abandon the core worlds and rebuild on the rim than face total extinction. Every species had agreed. Every species except one. The Zephyrian ambassador, her translucent skin flickering with anxious bioluminescence, had made one final plea. "You don't understand what you're facing. Our oldest records speak of them. The Devourers consumed the predecessor civilization at the height of their power. Your species is barely 3 centuries into space travel. This isn't courage, it's suicide." Elena remembered Admiral Chen's response, delivered in that calm, measured tone that had seen humanity through the Proxima Wars and the Titan Rebellion. "Perhaps it is, but Earth is our home. The colonies are our children. We don't abandon family." The Corvani representative, a massive insectoid whose compound eyes reflected the conference chamber's lights like fractured mirrors, had clicked his mandibles in what Elena recognized as their equivalent of a dismissive laugh. "Sentiment will not stop the Devourers. Logic demands survival." "Then we'll have to find something stronger than logic," Chun had replied. Now, 3 days later, Elena watched their allies disappear into the void, leaving humanity alone with its stubbornness and whatever strength that might provide. The bridge doors hissed open behind her. Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's xenobiologist, approached with a data tablet clutched in her hands. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and dark circles ringed her eyes. "The deep space monitoring stations are picking up the Devourer fleet," she said without preamble. "They're moving faster than our projections indicated. 57 massive bioships, each one the size of a small moon." Elena turned from the viewport. "How long?" "At current velocity, they'll reach the outer colonies in 18 hours. Earth in 36. 18 hours. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd expected more time, hoped for it. 18 hours to prepare for something that had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than humanity. "There's something else," Dr. Kim continued, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "The abandoned Zephyrian monitoring post on Kepler 442b transmitted some final data before going offline. The Devourers aren't just destroying worlds, they're consuming them completely. Matter, energy, even the quantum information that makes up the planetary matrices. When they're finished, there's nothing left but empty space." Elena nodded slowly. She'd read the classified reports, seen the archival footage from the predecessor ruins. Entire solar systems reduced to cosmic dust, their stars dimmed and dying. The Devourers didn't just kill civilizations, they erased them from existence entirely. "Has Admiral Chun seen this data?" "He's reviewing it now. Fleet Command is calling an emergency briefing in 1 hour." Elena looked back out at the stars, trying to imagine them dark and lifeless. Somewhere out there, the Devourers were coming, driven by hungers that spanned geological time. And here was humanity, standing in their path like children with slingshots facing a tsunami. The rational part of her mind agreed with their former allies. This was suicide. Humanity should have evacuated with the rest, should have preserved their species for some future return when the Devourers had moved on to whatever dark realm they called home. But as she watched the empty space where the evacuation fleet had been, Elena felt something else stirring in her chest. Something that had nothing to do with logic or survival calculations. It was the same feeling she'd had as a child, watching her father refuse to sell their family farm during the agricultural crisis. The same stubbornness that had driven humans to plant flags on hostile worlds and call them home. "Dr. Kim," she said finally, "in your professional opinion, what are our chances?" The xenobiologist was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Mathematically, 0. The Devourers have consumed civilizations that could reshape matter at the subatomic level. We're still figuring out faster-than-light travel. And unprofessionally?" Sarah Kim managed a small smile. "I've spent my career studying alien species, Captain. I've learned that sometimes the most important things can't be quantified. Every other species in the galaxy made the logical choice. But maybe logic isn't enough this time. Maybe the universe needs something different." Elena nodded, understanding passing between them. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, unaware that in 18 hours, everything would change. But for now, in this moment, humanity still existed. Still defied the inevitable. Still prepared to fight. The emergency briefing room aboard the UES Sovereign buzzed with tension thick enough to cut. Admiral Chun stood at the head of the holographic display table, his weathered face illuminated by the tactical projections showing the approaching Devourer fleet. Around the table, 23 ship captains and their senior officers waited in silence, their expressions ranging from grim determination to barely controlled fear. Elena had transferred over from the Defiant an hour earlier, along with the other task force commanders. The Sovereign served as humanity's flagship, a massive dreadnought that represented the pinnacle of human engineering. Looking at it now, she couldn't help but think it resembled a child's toy compared to the bioships crawling across the display. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Chun began, his voice carrying the weight of command earned through decades of impossible victories. "I won't insult your intelligence by pretending this is a conventional battle. What we're facing today isn't an enemy fleet. It's a force of nature. A cosmic storm that has raged for millions of years." He gestured, and the display zoomed in on one of the Devourer bioships. The thing defied easy description, part organism, part machine, part something else entirely. Its surface writhed with organic conduits that pulsed with sickly bioluminescence, while metallic structures jutted from its flesh like technological parasites. It was beautiful in the way that hurricanes were beautiful, terrible and awesome and completely alien to human understanding. "Our xenoarchaeology teams have spent the last 72 hours analyzing every piece of predecessor data we could access," Chun continued. "Dr. Reeves, your assessment." Dr. Marcus Reeves, a thin man with prematurely gray hair, stood and activated his portion of the display. Ancient symbols and partial translations flickered to life around the Devourer image. The predecessors called them Kethmoran in their language, roughly translated as those who unmake. According to the fragments we've recovered, the Devourers aren't just destroyers. They're harvesters. They consume not just matter and energy, but something the predecessors termed essence, the fundamental information that gives structure to reality itself. Captain Morrison of the UES Valkyrie leaned forward. "You're saying they eat the laws of physics?" "In a sense, yes. They break down the quantum foundations that hold matter together and metabolize that information. It's why nothing remains after they pass. They're not just killing worlds, they're editing them out of existence at the most fundamental level." The room fell silent. Elena felt the cold in her stomach spread outward, numbing her fingers. It was one thing to face an enemy that could destroy you. It was another entirely to face something that could make it so you had never existed at all. Admiral Chun let the silence stretch for a moment before continuing. The predecessors had weapons that could crack planets and shields that bent spacetime. They lasted approximately 6 months against the Devourers. Our most optimistic projections give us 6 hours. Then why are we here? The question came from Captain Torres of the UES Indomitable, a young officer who'd earned her command during the Centauri border conflicts. "With respect, Admiral, if this is hopeless, shouldn't we be evacuating whatever civilians we can?" Elena watched Chen's expression carefully. She'd served under him long enough to recognize the micro-expressions that crossed his face. A tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible straightening of his shoulders. The look of a man who'd already made an impossible choice and was preparing to defend it. Because, Captain Torres, sometimes the thing that makes the difference isn't superior technology or brilliant tactics. Sometimes it's the decision to stand when everyone else runs. Chen's voice took on a harder edge. Every species in this galaxy made the same calculation. Every species decided that survival trumped everything else. But they're missing something crucial. He paused, scanning the faces around the table. They're treating this like a natural disaster, something to be endured rather than fought. But the Devourers aren't a storm or a plague. They're predators. And predators, no matter how ancient or powerful, can be hurt if you know where to strike. Dr. Kim spoke up from her position near the display controls. "Admiral, our analysis suggests that the Devourer's consciousness exists in a distributed network across their fleet. They share information instantaneously, coordinate perfectly, and adapt to threats in real time. Even if we could damage one bioship, the others would immediately develop countermeasures." "Which brings us to our advantage," Chen replied, surprising everyone in the room. "They've never faced humans before. Every species they've encountered has been logical, rational, predictable. They flee when faced with overwhelming odds. They surrender when defeat is certain. They adapt their strategies based on calculated risks and benefits." Elena felt understanding beginning to dawn. "But we don't." "Exactly, Captain Vasquez. Humans are the only species that charges machine gun nests, that flies experimental aircraft into storms, that builds cities on fault lines and calls them home. We're the only species stupid enough to look at impossible odds and say, 'Hold my beer.'" A few nervous chuckles rippled around the table, but Elena could see the idea taking hold. It was insane, but it was also recognizably human. "The Devourers have perfect information sharing and instantaneous adaptation," Chan continued. "But that also means they have no experience with irrationality. They can't predict what they've never encountered before." Commander Zhang raised his hand. "What exactly are you proposing, Admiral?" Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. "We're going to do something that no rational species would ever attempt. We're going to ram a dreadnought into the center of their formation at maximum velocity while simultaneously detonating every nuclear weapon in our arsenal." The room erupted in voices, some shocked, some excited, some terrified. Elena felt her heart racing as the implications sank in. It was suicide, pure and simple. But it was also the kind of magnificent, futile gesture that defined humanity at its best and worst. "That's not a battle plan," Captain Morrison protested. "That's a suicide run." "Yes, it is," Chen agreed calmly. "And that's exactly why it might work. The Devourers have consumed civilizations for millions of years. They've seen every rational response to their presence. But they've never seen a species willing to sacrifice everything not for survival, but for principle." Dr. Reeves cleared his throat nervously. "Admiral, even if such an action succeeded in damaging their fleet, the survivors would simply adapt their defenses. Any follow-up attacks would be useless." "Which is why there won't be any follow-up attacks," Chen replied. "This isn't about winning a war, Dr. Reeves. This isn't even about saving humanity. This is about sending a message that will echo across the galaxy for the next million years." Elena stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. "Admiral, permission to volunteer for the ramming operation." "Denied, Captain. I'll be taking the Sovereign in personally." Chen's voice brooked no argument. "But I need the rest of the fleet to do something equally important. I need you to witness what happens here. I need you to record everything and transmit it to every corner of the galaxy." "Sir." Captain Torres looked confused. "Because when this is over, when the dust settles and the universe counts its dead, someone needs to know that humanity was here. Someone needs to know that when faced with the ultimate predator, when confronted with their own inevitable extinction, humans didn't run. Humans didn't hide. Humans stood up and said no. Elena felt tears stinging her eyes, though she couldn't say if they were from fear or pride or something else entirely. Around the table, she could see similar emotions playing across her colleagues' faces. They were about to die, all of them, but they were going to die as humans on their own terms. The devourers have fed on fear for millions of years, Chun continued. They've grown fat on despair and resignation, but they've never tasted defiance. They've never encountered a species that would rather burn than bow. The Admiral straightened, his command presence filling the room. We have 16 hours before they reach the outer colonies. 16 hours to prepare for the most important battle in human history. Not because we can win, but because we can show the universe that some things are more important than winning. Elena looked around the table one more time, meeting the eyes of officers she'd served with for years. Tomorrow they would all be dead. Their ships would be scattered atoms, their crews erased from existence by forces beyond comprehension. But tonight they were still human, still defiant, still ready to fight. The viewing lounge of the HFY Defiant had been converted into an impromptu memorial space. Elena walked among the holographic displays, each one showing images from the human colonies that would soon be dust. New Geneva's crystal spires reaching toward twin suns. The agricultural domes of Kepler Prime, where her sister had raised her children. The mining stations orbiting Proxima Centauri, where her father had worked before the cancer took him. All of it would be gone in 12 hours. She paused before a display showing Earth, the blue marble that had given birth to their stubborn, impossible species. The planet looked so peaceful from orbit, white clouds swirling over green continents and blue oceans. No sign of the frantic preparations taking place on its surface as humanity made ready for its final stand. Captain, Dr. Kim's voice interrupted her thoughts. We're receiving priority transmissions from the surface. You should see this. Elena followed her to the communications center, where Chief Petty Officer Walsh was monitoring dozens of incoming signals. The screens showed feeds from across human space, cities, colonies, orbital stations, deep space outposts, all of them carrying the same message. It started about an hour ago, Walsh explained. Every human settlement is broadcasting. They know what's coming, and they're not evacuating. Elena watched in amazement as the feeds told their story. On Mars, the terraforming crews had abandoned their evacuation shuttles and returned to their atmospheric processors. If Earth dies, someone needs to finish the work, one engineer was saying to the camera. Someone needs to make sure the dream doesn't die with us. On Europa Station, the research teams had locked down their facilities and were transmitting their complete scientific databases to automated probes programmed to seek out the evacuated alien civilizations. Maybe we can't survive this, Dr. Elizabeth Crawford was saying, but our knowledge can. Everything we've learned, everything we've discovered, it needs to survive even if we don't. The feed from Luna showed something that made Elena's throat tighten. Children, hundreds of them from the lunar colonies, had painted messages on the observation windows of their schools. We're not afraid in rainbow letters. Humans never give up in bold red strokes. Thank you for fighting for US in careful blue script. My God, Dr. Kim whispered. They're all staying. Not all, Walsh corrected, highlighting another feed. The civilian evacuation ships that launched 3 days ago, they're turning around. Every single one of them. Look at this. The screen showed the bridge of a massive colony ship, the UCS New Horizon. Captain Sarah Chun, Admiral Chen's daughter, Elena realized with a start, was addressing her passengers over the internal comm system. Ladies and gentlemen, we are approximately 6 hours out from the Kepler system, well beyond the projected combat zone. According to our original evacuation plan, we should continue to the rendezvous point in the Vega system and wait for the all-clear signal. The camera panned across the ship's main assembly hall, showing thousands of civilian faces, families with children, elderly couples, young professionals who'd built lives among the stars, all of them listening with the same intense focus. However, Captain Chun continued, we've been monitoring fleet communications. We know what our military is planning. We know they're going to make their stand in the Sol system and we know they don't expect to survive." A murmur ran through the crowd, but no one spoke. "I've consulted with the other civilian captains, and we've reached a unanimous decision. We're going home, not to hide behind our brave men and women in uniform, but to stand beside them. Because if humanity is going to make its final statement to the universe, we're all going to make it together." The hall erupted in cheers and applause. Elena watched families embrace, saw children who didn't fully understand the situation but recognized the courage in their parents' faces. This was madness. Beautiful, terrible, human madness. "Captain Chan," someone called from the crowd. "What about the children? Shouldn't they have a chance to live?" Sarah Chen's expression softened. "My friends, we've spent 3 centuries teaching our children that some things are worth dying for. Freedom, justice, the right to choose your own path among the stars. How can we abandon those lessons now, when they matter most?" Elena felt something breaking inside her chest. Not despair, but its opposite. A fierce, burning pride that threatened to overwhelm her completely. This was why they were fighting. Not for survival, not for victory, but for this, the right to choose their own ending. "Captain," Chief Walsh said quietly, "we're getting similar reports from across human space. The Titan mining collectives have voted to return. The asteroid belt haulers are turning their ships around. Even the deep space explorers are abandoning their missions to be here for the end." Dr. Kim was staring at the feeds with tears streaming down her face. "They're coming home to die with us." "No," Elena said firmly. "They're coming home to be human with us. There's a difference." The communication board chimed with an incoming priority signal. Elena recognized Admiral Chen's personal frequency. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. As you've undoubtedly seen, our civilian population has made their choice. The evacuation is cancelled. All civilian vessels are to maintain safe distance from the combat zone, but I will not order them to leave if they choose to stay." His voice carried a weight Elena had never heard before. Pride mixed with grief, determination tempered by love. "In 3 hours, we'll be receiving detailed intelligence on the Devourer fleet composition from our deep space monitoring stations. Based on that data, we'll finalize our battle plan. But before we do, I want everyone to understand something." The channel crackled with static, then cleared. "What we're about to do has never been attempted in the recorded history of galactic civilization. No species has ever chosen to face the Devourers in direct combat. They all ran, hid, waited for the storm to pass. And perhaps they were right. Perhaps survival is the highest virtue, and what we're doing is the height of foolishness." Elena found herself holding her breath. "But I've spent 40 years in service to humanity, and I've learned that we are not a rational species. We are not guided by logic or self-preservation or any of the calculated virtues that our alien allies respect. We are guided by something much simpler and much more dangerous." Another pause, filled with the crackle of interstellar static. "We are guided by love. Love for our families, our homes, our ideas about what the universe should be. And love, my friends, is the most irrational force in existence. It makes us do impossible things. It makes us stand when we should run, fight when we should surrender, hope when we should despair." Elena closed her eyes, letting the Admiral's words wash over her. The Devourers have consumed civilizations that spanned galaxies. They've fed on species that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. But they've never faced love before. They've never encountered a species that would choose extinction over abandoning what they cherish most. The communication ended with a soft click, leaving the room in silence. Elena looked around at her crew. Men and women she'd served with for years, people who'd become family in the depths of space. They were all looking at her, waiting for her to say something, to provide some kind of leadership in this moment between heartbeats. "You heard the Admiral," she said finally. "We have 3 hours to prepare. Chief Walsh, I want continuous monitoring of all civilian vessels. Make sure they stay out of the direct combat zone, but don't try to turn them away if they want to witness what happens here." She turned to Dr. Kim. "Doctor, I want you to prepare a complete scientific database for transmission. Everything we know about the Devourers, everything we've learned from the predecessor sites, all of our research on their biology and capabilities. If we're going to die, we're going to make sure our deaths teach the galaxy something useful. Finally, she addressed the entire crew over the ship's internal comm. All hands. This is the captain. You've all seen the feeds from home. You know what our families and friends have chosen to do. In 3 hours, we're going to join Admiral Chun in what may be the final battle of human civilization. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I won't lie to you. We're going to die today. All of us. Our ships will be destroyed, our bodies will be consumed, and the universe will be a little bit darker without us. But before we go, we're going to show these ancient predators something they've never seen before. Elena smiled, feeling the fierce joy of absolute commitment flowing through her veins. We're going to show them what humans look like when they're fighting for everything they love. The first Devourer bioship emerged from hyperspace at exactly 1427 Galactic Standard Time, appearing in the outer system like a cancer materializing in healthy tissue. Elena watched from the Defiance command bridge as the massive organism, easily 3 kilometers long and pulsing with bioluminescent veins, began its approach toward the inner planets. Contact, reported Lieutenant Morrison from the sensor station. Single bioship, bearing 285 Mark 7, distance 42 million kilometers and closing. Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the fleet communication channel. All vessels maintain position. Let it come to us. Elena gripped the arms of her command chair, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to order an immediate attack. The Devourer ship moved with the slow, deliberate purpose of a predator that had never encountered resistance. Its surface writhed with organic activity, tentacle-like appendages tasting the solar wind, while sensor clusters the size of city blocks swept space for signs of life. Captain, Dr. Kim called from her position at the science station. I'm reading massive energy buildups across the bioship's hull. It's preparing to feed. The main display shifted to show a tactical readout of the approaching vessel. Elena had studied the predecessor records extensively, but seeing a living Devourer ship was entirely different from examining ancient archaeological data. The thing radiated hunger, not just physical appetite, but something deeper and more fundamental. It wanted to unmake everything it encountered, to reduce ordered reality back to primordial chaos. Second contact, Morrison announced. Then a third. They're coming through one at a time. Probing our defenses, Elena muttered, testing to see what kind of resistance they'll face. But she knew, just as Admiral Chin knew, that this was all for show. The Devourers had perfect information sharing across their fleet. The first bioship would learn everything it needed to know about human capabilities, then transmit that knowledge instantly to its companions. There would be no learning curve, no gradual escalation. Just perfect, terrible efficiency. Captain, Dr. Kim's voice carried a note of excitement that seemed inappropriate for their situation. I'm detecting something unusual in the bioship's emission patterns. The quantum signatures are wrong, somehow. Elena turned toward the science station. Elaborate. According to everything we know about Devourer physiology, their bioships should be in perfect quantum coherence. All their molecular systems synchronized for maximum efficiency. But I'm reading interference patterns, almost like what, Doctor? Dr. Kim looked up from her instruments, confusion clear on her face. Like they're fighting themselves. Internal conflict at the cellular level. Before Elena could respond, the tactical display erupted with new contacts. 12 more bioships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, spreading out across the outer system like the fingers of a grasping hand. Each one was unique, some bristling with organic weapons that resembled diseased flowers, others smooth and predatory like deep-sea creatures scaled up to impossible proportions. Fleet composition confirmed. Admiral Chen's voice carried across the communication channel. 13 bioships, standard Devourer hunting pack formation. All vessels, prepare for Operation Last Stand. Elena activated her ship-wide communication system. All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The bridge came alive with controlled chaos as her crew prepared for combat. Weapons systems powered up with a thrumming hum that Elena felt in her bones. Shield generators engaged, wrapping the Defiant in layers of protective energy fields that would prove utterly inadequate against what they were about to face. "Captain," Lieutenant Morrison called out, "the lead bioship is changing course. It's heading directly for Earth." Elena watched the tactical display update, showing the massive organism adjusting its trajectory toward humanity's homeworld. The message was clear. The Devourers intended to consume Earth first, forcing the human fleet to watch their birthworld die before following it into oblivion. "Psychological warfare," she said quietly. "They want us to break formation, to charge in and die piecemeal trying to save Earth." "Will we?" Dr. Kim asked. Elena looked around the bridge at her crew. Men and women who'd followed her through 3 separate conflicts, who'd trusted her judgment in situations where trust was the only thing standing between them and death. Now she was asking them to trust her one final time, to believe that Admiral Chen's insane plan had even the slightest chance of success. "No," she said firmly. "We stick to the plan. Admiral Chen will make his run when the time is right." The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. The Devourer bioships moved through the outer system like a plague of locusts, sampling the solar wind and cataloging every piece of human technology they encountered. Elena could see smaller organisms, pilot fish to the main predators, detaching from the bioships and spreading throughout local space, tasting and analyzing everything they touched. "Captain," Dr. Kim called out suddenly, "I'm getting those interference patterns again, but stronger this time. It's coming from all 13 bioships simultaneously." Elena frowned. "Could it be some kind of weapon malfunction?" "I don't think so. It's more like they're experiencing some kind of systemic shock. As if they're encountering something they've never seen before and don't know how to process." "What could shock them? They've been feeding on civilizations for millions of years." Dr. Kim looked up from her console, her eyes wide with sudden understanding. "Us, Captain. We're what's shocking them." Before Elena could ask for clarification, the communication board lit up with an incoming message from Admiral Chun aboard the Sovereign. "All vessels, this is Admiral Chun. The Devourers have reached the inner system perimeter. In 30 seconds, I will begin my attack run. All ships are to maintain position and record everything that happens. Whatever the outcome, the galaxy needs to know that humanity was here." Elena gripped her command chair harder, her knuckles white with tension. Through the main viewport, she could see the distant glint of the Sovereign as it began to accelerate toward the Devourer formation. The massive dreadnought had been stripped of everything non-essential: crew quarters, recreational facilities, even life support systems beyond the bridge. Every available space had been packed with nuclear warheads and high-explosive charges, turning the entire ship into a single massive bomb. "This is Admiral Chun to all human vessels and civilian stations," came the final transmission. "It has been my honor to serve alongside the finest crews in the galaxy. Tell our story well." The Sovereign's engines flared to full power, pushing the dreadnought toward the Devourer fleet at maximum velocity. Elena watched the tactical display as the ship accelerated past safe limits, its hull beginning to glow from the stress of forces that would have torn apart a lesser vessel. The Devourers noticed the approach immediately. 3 of the bioships began converging on the Sovereign's projected course, their organic weapons charging with malevolent energy. Beam weapons that could slice through planetary crust lashed out across space, but Admiral Chun had plotted his course well. The Sovereign jinked and weaved between the attacks, its hull scarred but intact. "He's going to make it," someone whispered on the bridge. Elena held her breath as the Sovereign closed the final distance. The ship was glowing white-hot now, pieces of its outer hull beginning to shed from the incredible stresses. But it held together, driven by the sheer bloody-minded determination of its crew and the man who commanded them. At the last second, Admiral Chun activated the ship's self-destruct sequence. The explosion that followed was visible from Earth's surface, a brief new star that burned brighter than the sun for nearly 3 seconds. When the light faded, the Sovereign was gone, along with 2 of the Devourer bioships and significant portions of 3 others. For a moment, space was silent. Then the remaining bioships began to change. Elena watched in fascination as their organic hulls rippled and shifted, adapting to the new threat. Armor plating grew across vulnerable sections while new weapon clusters sprouted from their flesh like tumors. Within minutes, they had completely reconfigured themselves to counter humanity's tactics. "They're adapting," Dr. Kim said unnecessarily. Elena nodded grimly. "Just like we expected. The question is whether Admiral Chen's sacrifice accomplished what he intended." The answer came in the form of a data burst transmitted across all human communication channels. Every recording device in the fleet had captured the Sovereign's final moments in perfect detail, the impossible courage of a single ship charging into certain death, the brilliant flash of defiance that had briefly outshone the stars themselves. But more importantly, they had recorded the Devourer's reaction. "Captain," Dr. Kim said quietly, "those interference patterns I've been detecting? They spiked dramatically during the Admiral's attack run. I think the Devourers are experiencing something they've never felt before." Elena leaned forward. "What?" Dr. Kim looked up from her console, her face pale but determined. "Uncertainty, Captain. For the first time in millions of years, the Devourers don't know what's going to happen next." Elena leaned forward. "What?" Dr. Kim looked up from her console, her face pale but determined. "Uncertainty, Captain. For the first time in millions of years, the Devourers don't know what's going to happen next." The silence that followed Admiral Chen's sacrifice lasted exactly 47 seconds. Elena counted every one of them, watching the tactical display as the remaining 11 Devourer bioships held their positions in space, their organic hulls rippling with what Dr. Kim's instruments registered as massive internal fluctuations. Then space erupted with activity. Every civilian vessel in the system, cargo haulers, passenger liners, mining ships, even small personal craft, began accelerating toward the Devourer formation. Not in formation, not following any coordinated battle plan, but in a chaotic swarm that defied every principle of military strategy Elena had ever learned. "What are they doing?" Lieutenant Morrison gasped from his station. Elena knew exactly what they were doing. The same thing Admiral Chen had done. The same thing humanity had always done when faced with impossible odds. They were fighting back. The UCS New Horizon led the charge, its massive bulk accelerating far beyond safe parameters. Captain Sarah Chen's voice crackled across the communication channels, steady despite the obvious strain in her voice. "This is New Horizon to all vessels. We may not be military, but we're human. We're going to show these things that every human ship is a weapon when it needs to be." Elena watched in amazement as the civilian fleet spread out across space, each vessel choosing its own target among the bioships. They had no weapons beyond emergency mining charges and industrial cutting lasers, no armor beyond whatever hull plating had been designed to protect against micrometeorites. But they came anyway, driven by the same stubborn courage that had carried humanity to the stars. The Devourers responded with predictable efficiency. Beam weapons lashed out across space, vaporizing the smaller civilian craft instantly. But for every ship destroyed, 3 more took its place. And something was wrong with the Devourer weapons. Elena could see it in the erratic firing patterns, the missed shots that should have been impossible for creatures with perfect coordination. "Dr. Kim," she called out, "what's happening to them?" The xenobiologist was bent over her instruments, her fingers flying across the controls as she analyzed the incoming data. "The quantum interference patterns are getting stronger, Captain. It's like their neural networks are experiencing some kind of cascade failure." "From what?" "I'm not sure, but I have a theory." Dr. Kim looked up, her eyes bright with sudden understanding. "The Devourers have spent millions of years consuming civilizations that behaved predictably. When faced with overwhelming force, they retreated, regrouped, tried to find logical solutions. The Devourers learned to anticipate and counter those responses." Elena watched the New Horizon take a direct hit from a bioship's main weapon. The massive liner's hull cracked open like an eggshell, spilling atmosphere and debris into space. But instead of retreating, the dying ship accelerated harder, ramming itself into the bioship's flank at full velocity. "But we're not responding predictably," Elena said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Exactly. The Devourer's neural networks are trying to process our behavior and failing. They can't understand why we're charging weapons that will destroy us, why we're not trying to preserve ourselves. It's causing a kind of cognitive dissonance at the cellular level. The battle raged across the inner system, a desperate melee that bore no resemblance to the clean, calculated conflicts Elena had studied in military history. Human ships threw themselves at the bioships with reckless abandon, some exploding on impact, others managing to inflict minor damage before being destroyed. The Devourers adapted constantly, growing new weapons and defenses, but their responses were becoming increasingly erratic. Elena activated the fleet communication channel. All remaining military vessels, this is Captain Vasquez of the UES Defiant. Our civilian friends are showing us how it's done. Time to join the party. She turned to her crew, seeing her own desperate resolve reflected in their faces. All hands, prepare for ramming speed. We're going to follow Admiral Chen's example. Captain, Dr. Kim interrupted. Wait, there's something else. Elena paused, her hand hovering over the acceleration controls. The interference patterns aren't random. They're synchronized across all the remaining bioships. And they're getting stronger every time one of our ships attacks. I think we're actually hurting them in ways they can't adapt to. Elena stared at the tactical display, watching as another civilian ship, a mining hauler called the Iron Dream, slammed into a bioship's weapon cluster, detonating its cargo of industrial explosives. The bioship reeled from the impact, its hull rippling with damage that spread far beyond the blast radius. It's not just physical damage, Dr. Kim continued excitedly. We're causing psychological trauma to a collective consciousness that has never experienced it before. Every time we choose to die rather than surrender, every time we sacrifice ourselves for others, we're introducing concepts that their neural networks can't process. Elena felt a wild hope stirring in her chest. You're saying we can beat them? I'm saying we're already beating them. Look at the tactical display. Elena looked. The 11 remaining bioships were no longer advancing in their perfect formation. Several had actually begun to retreat, pulling back toward the outer system. Their movements were erratic, almost confused, as if they were fighting some internal battle that had nothing to do with the human forces attacking them. They're afraid, Elena breathed. The Devourers are actually afraid. The realization hit her like a physical blow. For millions of years, these creatures had been the ultimate predators, consuming entire civilizations without encountering meaningful resistance. They were perfectly adapted to face logical, rational species that valued survival above all else. But humanity wasn't logical or rational. Humanity was something the Devourers had never encountered before. A species that could choose principle over survival, that could love something more than their own lives. Elena opened the communication channel to all remaining vessels. All ships, this is Captain Vasquez. Do not proceed with ramming attacks. We have a new mission. She could hear the confusion in the responding voices, but also the discipline that made them listen. Our civilian friends have shown the Devourers something they've never seen before. Now we need to show them something else. We need to show them that humans don't just know how to die. We know how to live. Elena began issuing new orders, coordinating the remaining military vessels into a defensive formation around Earth. Not to make a last stand, but to demonstrate something the Devourers couldn't understand: the willingness to protect others at the cost of personal advancement. The Devourer bioships continued their retreat, their perfect coordination shattered by exposure to human irrationality. Dr. Kim's instruments showed cascading failures throughout their neural networks as they struggled to process concepts like self-sacrifice, altruism, and courage without logical foundation. They're withdrawing to the outer system, Lieutenant Morrison reported, wonder clear in his voice. Elena nodded, but she knew this was far from over. The Devourers were retreating, but they were also learning. Their perfect adaptive capabilities would eventually find a way to process human behavior, to categorize it and develop countermeasures. But for now, for this moment, humanity had done the impossible. They had made predators afraid. Captain, Dr. Kim called out, her voice trembling with excitement. I'm receiving something extraordinary. The retreating bioships are transmitting data to each other, but it's not tactical information. It's something else entirely. Elena moved to the science station, looking over Dr. Kim's shoulder at the scrolling data streams. The patterns were unlike anything in their xenobiological databases, complex, almost artistic in their structure. "What am I looking at, Doctor?" "I think," Dr. Kim said slowly, "I think they're trying to understand us. These transmissions aren't about adapting to our weapons or tactics. They're philosophical discussions. They're asking each other questions about concepts they've never encountered before." Elena stared at the data streams, seeing something that chilled and amazed her in equal measure. The Devourers weren't just retreating, they were thinking. For the first time in millions of years, these ancient predators were questioning their own nature, trying to comprehend a species that valued abstract concepts more than survival. Questions like what? Dr. Kim highlighted several transmission bursts, her translation software struggling with concepts that had no equivalent in Devourer biology. Why do they choose death over submission? What is the purpose of protecting those who cannot defend themselves? How can intelligence exist without the prime directive of self-preservation? Elena felt tears stinging her eyes as the full magnitude of what they had accomplished began to sink in. They hadn't just survived contact with the Devourers, they had changed them. They had introduced doubt into minds that had known only certainty for eons. The retreat continued, 11 damaged bioships limping toward the edge of the system while broadcasting questions that would echo through the cosmos long after the last human had turned to dust. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, Elena stood once again on the observation deck of the HFY Defiant, but the view had changed dramatically. Where once she had watched alien evacuation fleets disappear into hyperspace, now she observed the greatest gathering of species in galactic history. Hundreds of ships from dozens of civilizations hung in space around Earth, their hulls gleaming with the reflected light of humanity's sun. They had come to witness something unprecedented. The return of the Zephyrians, the Corvani, and all the other species that had fled before the Devourer threat. But they weren't returning as refugees or as conquerors. They were returning as students. "Captain," Dr. Kim approached with the data tablet in her hands, her expression a mixture of wonder and exhaustion. "The latest reports from the deep space monitoring stations confirm it. The Devourer fleet has split into smaller groups, and they're not consuming worlds anymore. They're studying them." Elena nodded, unsurprised by the news. The transformation had been gradual but undeniable. In the weeks following their retreat from Sol, the Devourers had begun exhibiting behavior that contradicted millions of years of established patterns. Instead of consuming the abandoned worlds in their path, they approached them carefully, almost reverently, sending small bioprobes to sample and analyze rather than devour. "Any word from the contact team?" Dr. Kim's expression brightened. "Dr. Reeves established communication with one of the Devourer subfleets yesterday. The linguistic algorithms are still struggling with their conceptual framework, but we're making progress. They're calling themselves something that translates roughly as those who question now." Elena smiled at that. The ancient predators had abandoned their original name, choosing instead a designation that reflected their new purpose. The species that had once unmade reality itself was now trying to understand it in ways they had never attempted before. "The Zephyrian delegation wants to meet with you again," Dr. Kim continued. "Ambassador Luzeth is particularly interested in our psychological warfare techniques." Elena almost laughed at the irony. The other species still didn't understand what had really happened at Sol. They thought humanity had developed some new form of warfare, some tactical innovation that had defeated the Devourers through superior strategy. They refused to accept the simpler truth, that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the willingness to use it, even when logic demands otherwise. The door to the observation deck opened, admitting Commander Zhang and a small group of visiting dignitaries. Elena recognized the Corvani military attaché and several Zephyrian researchers, their translucent skin flickering with patterns that her translation software identified as intense curiosity mixed with apprehension. "Captain Vasquez," Ambassador Luzeth stepped forward, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to formal greeting configurations. "We have completed our analysis of the battle recordings. Your species' tactical innovations are remarkable, but we still do not understand the underlying strategic philosophy. Elena exchanged a glance with Dr. Kim before responding. They had been through this conversation dozens of times with dozens of different species, and the result was always the same. The galaxy's rational civilizations simply could not comprehend a strategy based on love rather than logic. Ambassador, with respect, you're overthinking it. We didn't defeat the Devourers through tactical innovation. We defeated them by being ourselves. The Corvani attaché, General Kthresh, clicked his mandibles in what Elena had learned was their equivalent of skeptical laughter. Captain, we have studied every military conflict in recorded galactic history. No species achieves victory through being themselves. Victory requires superior technology, better tactics, or advantageous positioning. Elena walked to the viewport, gesturing toward the mixed fleet that surrounded Earth. General, how many of those ships do you think would have stayed to fight if they were facing extinction? Thresh's compound eyes followed her gesture. None, obviously. Tactical withdrawal in the face of overwhelming odds is basic military doctrine. Exactly. Every rational species in the galaxy made the same calculation. Survival trumped everything else. But humans aren't rational, General. We're emotional, stubborn, and completely willing to die for abstract concepts that have no survival value whatsoever. Ambassador Luzeth's patterns shifted to what Elena recognized as confusion. But such behavior should have resulted in your extinction, not victory. It almost did, Elena admitted. Admiral Chun died believing he was making a futile gesture. Every civilian who flew their ship into a Devourer bioship died believing they were accomplishing nothing more than buying their families a few extra minutes of life. She turned back to the assembled delegates, seeing the same expression on all their faces, intelligent beings struggling to understand something that defied their fundamental assumptions about reality. The Devourers had consumed civilizations that could reshape matter at the quantum level, species that had transcended physical limitations entirely. But they had never encountered a civilization that valued love more than logic, that chose principles over survival. We introduced them to concepts their neural networks couldn't process, and that cognitive dissonance broke their perfect coordination. Dr. Kim stepped forward, activating a holographic display that showed the latest communication attempts with the reformed Devourer fleets. They're still struggling to understand us. Their latest transmissions include questions about the nature of self-sacrifice, the purpose of protecting the weak, and the logical foundations of hope. General Kthresh studied the display with intense focus. They are trying to quantify emotional responses? They're trying to understand what it means to be human, Elena corrected. And in doing so, they're becoming something they never were before, philosophers instead of predators. The observation deck fell silent as the implications sank in. Elena looked out at the gathering of ships, representing species that had fled in terror 6 months ago, and now came seeking wisdom from the stubborn little species that had refused to run. The Devourers aren't our enemies anymore, she said finally. They're not anyone's enemies. We didn't defeat them, we changed them. We showed them that there are things in the universe more important than survival, more powerful than logic, more enduring than fear. Ambassador Luzeth's patterns shifted to something Elena had never seen before. A combination of respect, wonder, and perhaps the faintest echo of hope. Captain, the Zephyrian said quietly, what do we do now? Elena smiled, feeling the weight of the future settling on her shoulders. Humanity had survived its first encounter with cosmic horror, not through superior technology or brilliant strategy, but through the simple act of being human when the universe demanded otherwise. Now, she said, we teach. We show the galaxy that sometimes the most rational thing you can do is be completely irrational. We prove that love is stronger than logic, that hope is more powerful than despair, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the species stupid enough to fight impossible odds is the one that changes everything. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, but the universe itself was different now. The Devourers had become seekers, the fleeing species had become students, and humanity had become something they had never intended to be. Teachers of the impossible, guardians of the irrational, and living proof that some things are worth dying for. But more importantly, they had proven that some things are worth living for, even when logic says there's no hope left. Elena watched the mixed fleet begin its journey toward the outer rim, where the transformed devourers waited to continue their strange new education in the ways of beings who chose love over survival. The universe was about to become a much more interesting place. Hashtag when every other species fled, humanity stayed and fought.